Here's a preview of the quiz you'll take when you're done watching this lecture. Intelligence is a very complicated trait in any organism. There are many ways to define and measure intelligence. To some degree, intelligence is written into our genes, although we don't really know which ones. But it's also something that can be developed with hard work and studying. Those people who could put in little effort and get good grades always frustrated me because I had to work hard to get good grades. So in this example, because intelligence has some genetic basis, it's a trait on which natural selection can work. A change in the environment, in this case the lids on trash cans, causes some genes to be more valuable than others, so they're selected for. Smart bears are selected for because their use of tools allows them to get a resource that's limited: food. This extra food allows them to survive and reproduce, so the genes for intelligence become more common. If smart genes in bears become more common, evolution is taking place. But this is a silly example. Bears don't use tools to open garbage can lids. Remember back to genetics when we learned that some traits are controlled by a single gene or DNA segment, like the ability to digest lactose in milk, and other traits, like skin color, were controlled by many genes. Both types of traits can be selected for or against by natural selection. Two examples of a single gene being favored by natural selection are resistance genes in bacteria or insects and skin color in lizards. When you get sick with a bacterial infection like strep, the doctor will prescribe antibiotics. They are a cocktail of poison that kill the bacteria all over your body, the good and the bad, and so your illness caused by the bad bacteria goes away. Since we've been using antibiotics for a long time now, there are some bacteria that contain mutations that provide them with greater fitness. They have some mechanism that allows them to sidestep the effects of antibiotics. They may produce a protein that blocks the antibiotics from getting into their cells, or an enzyme that destroys the antibiotic. Other bacteria may have developed a degree of tolerance to the antibiotic. That's why it's so important to finish taking antibiotics. If you stop when you feel better, the bacteria that are somewhat tolerant are able to survive and reproduce. Natural selection will favor the genes that made them tolerant, and these genes will become more common. Eventually, the antibiotic will not be very effective, if it's so common to be tolerant. This is a problem doctors face today. We're not developing antibiotics at a fast enough pace to keep up with bacteria evolution. You may have heard of MRSA. This is a staph infection that's resistant to antibiotics. Staph is a skin infection that's spread by contact. The NFL is actually battling rampant MRSA infections. In 2003, there was a MRSA outbreak here in St. Louis with the Rams. This same type of resistance plagues farmers who spray their crops for insects. Mutations in some insects have sprung up randomly, making them resistant to insect spray. They are able to survive and reproduce, so the gene for resistance becomes more common, and after a while, the insect spray is hardly effective. Another single gene mutation is lizard skin color. The initial population of lizards had 3 skin colors: red, black, and brown. Red was quickly selected against, while there was less selective pressure against the brown lizards until generation 20. We can see that because the percentage of brown lizards went down slowly. Then between generation 20 and 30, there was a strong selective pressure for black lizards and against brown lizards. Brown lizards declined rapidly, while black lizards increased rapidly. Traits that are controlled by more than one gene are polygenic traits. We can pick out polygenic traits because there is a wide range of phenotypes. With resistant to antibiotics or insect spray, there are only 2 phenotypes, ones that are resistant and ones that are not. Same with the lizard example. There were only 3 phenotypes: red, brown, and black. But with a wide range of phenotypes comes a wide range of fitness. Depending on which phenotypes on a bell curve are favored, this type of natural selection can be classified as either directional selection, stabilizing selection, or disruptive selection. Directional selection is where one extreme on the bell curve of phenotypes is favored. This means that eventually the average will shift in one direction. Giraffes used to have fairly short necks, but as food resources became limited, the giraffes with longer necks could reach leaves higher in the trees. These genes for longer necks were providing the giraffes with an advantage that allowed them to live longer and reproduce more than giraffes with shorter necks, which may starve before they had any offspring. Therefore, the average neck size in giraffes increased. The motto for stabilizing selection is that there's nothing wrong with being average. In fact, being average provides an advantage when it comes to fitness. An example of stabilizing selection is human birth weight. Having low birth weight is a disadvantage because it's usually the result of not being developed enough to survive outside the womb. Having a high birth rate is also a disadvantage. Your poor, poor mother. Infants can also be harmed during birth if they're too large. Broken bones and lack of oxygen are the two biggest problems. In disruptive selection, being average is no good. Since average is selected against, and the two extremes are selected for, two distinct phenotypes are produced. Take, for example, finches. They're a type of bird. Large seeds as well as small seeds are available food resources. Birds with large beaks are able to easily eat the large seeds, and birds with small beaks can get the small seeds. If the bird's beak is somewhere in the middle, it's hard to break open the large seeds, and it can't get into the tiny spaces where the small seeds may have fallen. Natural selection isn't the only way for evolution to happen, or a genetic change in a population over time to occur. Humans actually play a pretty big role in evolution sometimes. Artificial selection is when humans breed the characteristics we feel are most desirable. All dogs are descendants of wolves, but different types of dogs were bred for specific characteristics. Some dogs, like Shih Tzus, were bred to be companions. The calmest, gentlest, friendliest dogs were bred. Other dogs were bred to be guard dogs, and the most territorial, largest dogs were bred. Others, like greyhounds, were bred to race, so the fastest dogs were bred. Many domestic plants have their characteristics due to artificial selection as well. Depending on what part of the plant is desired, cauliflower, broccoli, cabbage, and Brussels sprouts can all be selected for from the same relative, the wild mustard plant. Corn came from an ancestor called teosinte with dried stalks. The starchiest seeds were selected for by Native Americans. A similar story can be told of many plants that humans use for crops. Sometimes change in a population is random. When we did Punnett squares with one trait, we predicted the chances of two parents having offspring with specific genes. And just like it's possible to flip heads on a coin 10 times in a row, it's possible for a allele to be passed down to an offspring more often, simply because of random chance. This is called genetic drift. It's more commonly seen in small populations. It's more likely to get heads more often than tails if you flip the coin 10 times versus if you flip the coin 1,000 times. After flipping the coin that much, it's more likely that the heads and tails flips will average out to be about 50% each. Mutation is another example of genetic drift. The allele frequency in a population changes because of some random occurrence. Another way for evolution to happen is through the bottleneck effect. The picture is a really good visualization for what happens. Imagine a population where blue alleles and yellow alleles are pretty evenly distributed. Then some catastrophic event like a natural disaster or humans overhunting animals occur. A few random individuals survive and reproduce. When the population reaches its previous size, the blue allele is now much more common than the yellow allele. And not because it provides any kind of advantage, but simply because when the population was small, there were more blue alleles just by random chance. The last way populations evolve is through the founder's effect. This happens when a small population leaves the larger one to settle in a new habitat, sort of like the pioneers that went west for gold. The only difference is this small founding population has no intention of getting up and leaving. They may be birds blown off course while migrating, or bugs on a log that drift to some new habitat, or humans that accidentally, or on purpose, bring a new species to a place they haven't previously lived. Did you know that's how pigeons came to America? They're originally from China, and some crazy person found them to be beautiful birds and brought them to the U.S. Now they run rampant in large cities because they have no natural predators. There are lots of examples of these types of invasive species, and sometimes they cause big problems. But that's a whole other lecture. Don't forget to take the quiz.